everybody, and welcome back to our video series on suicide prevention. My name is Taylor Eusetis, and I work as a suicide prevention educator for Crisis Services of North Alabama. In today's video, we're going to be covering risk factors and protective factors. So when we talk about risk factors, these are factors that increase the likelihood of suicidal behavior, things that put somebody at a higher risk. Protective factors, however, are factors that lower that risk for suicidal behavior. They protect that individual from dealing with some of the fallout of what they may be going through. So when we talk about risk factors, we have something called fundamental risk factors. So first off, this can include biological risk factors. These can be things like your genetic load, your sex, your age, your race, things like that, mostly demographics. Another one is personal or psychological risk factors. So these might include if you've experienced child abuse at any point in your life, if you've experienced a loss of a parent. And that one can be especially relevant if you've lost that parent specifically to suicide. People that lose a loved one to suicide are now 6 times more likely to attempt themselves. It's what we call a ripple effect. Another one might be a culture shock or culture shift. Your values, your religions, your beliefs might be risk factors, kind of depending on the situation. And then that last one, drugs and alcohol. Substance abuse is very common with people that are struggling with suicidal thoughts. So that's something that you'll hear kind of repeatedly throughout the presentation. So another fundamental risk factor are going to be environmental risk factors. These can be things such as season of the year. Seasonal affective disorder typically takes place around like winter time when it's dark and it's cold and kind of gloomy, so people tend to have more mental health issues around that time. They might be a little bit more depressed. Geography can play a factor as well. When you look at kind of your states that have higher suicide rates, you look at Montana, Alaska, Wyoming, that you can kind of see where that rural versus urban area comes into play. In those states that I just mentioned, they're very large areas with very, very little population. So a lot of the individuals that live in those areas don't have good access to mental health resources. Where you live can kind of play a factor in that. It can have a part in whether or not you do have resources available to you. So we also have things called proximal risk factors. These are triggers or final straws. So this could be something like a crisis in a relationship, and that's a common theme with youth suicide. The number one factor behind youth suicide is relationship issues. Now, that might be issues with your significant other, issues with your friends, with your family. It just kind of depends on the situation. Another one might be loss of freedom, if somebody's fired or expelled, illness, or again, kind of that idea of major loss. One thing that you'll notice with all of these risk factors is that idea of hopelessness. These all lead to an increased feeling of hopelessness. So here we're going to talk about the lethal triad. This is when these 3 factors are present, the risk of violence is very, very high. So the 3 factors that we're talking about are an upset person, a firearm, and then alcohol or drugs. If somebody's upset, they're abusing substances, and they have access to a weapon, those are all very, very high risk factors. So some strong predictors. Some of the strongest predictors for suicidal behavior are going to be a previous suicide attempt. Somebody that's attempted suicide once is more likely to attempt a second time. If they've attempted twice, they are more likely for a third time. It kind of builds on itself as it goes. Another strong predictor is going to be current talk of suicide or making a plan. This may be, maybe they're looking things up online, maybe they're procuring weapons, whatever it might be. A strong wish to die or a preoccupation with death. This can come in the form of their thoughts, maybe what they're consuming, maybe what they're writing or listening to, kind of just depends. Depression is a very strong predictor, mental health issues. Again, we'll see that idea of hopelessness, and withdrawal is something that you might notice. People might tend to kind of isolate themselves from their family, from their friends, from their hobbies, all sorts of things. Substance use, again, very, very strong predictor. And then a recent attempt by a friend or family member. Like I said earlier, you can kind of see that ripple effect coming into play. So now we're going to talk about some protective factors. When we talk about protective factors, again, these are factors that lower the risk for suicidal behavior. So having a counselor or a therapist, some sort of mental health professional to help you kind of guide through those situations. A duty to others can be very helpful. Good health, medication compliance, that's very important. If you and your doctor decide that medication is the route that you want to go, it is very important that you stick to whatever medication regimen they prescribe. A lot of times people tend to feel better, and then once they feel better, they're like, oh, I don't need that anymore. That can lead to a lot of issues. job security and skills, responsibility for children, again, that kind of ties into duty to others, and support. Support is huge. In a video coming up, we're going to be talking about just kind of different ways to find support and what your support system might look like, so be on the lookout for that. And then some more protective factors. Limited access to means. Now, when we talk about limited access to means, we're referring to weapons, alcohol, and medication. If that's something that you have in your house, just make sure that it's not easy to get to, it's locked away. If you are concerned about somebody in your household, maybe see if you have a friend or a neighbor that can hold on to any of that for you so it's not so easy to get to. Some hope is very, very helpful. Positive self-esteem. Pets, again, kind of that idea of a duty to others. Safety agreements can be helpful, and treatment availability. Ensuring that people have that access to resources, have that access to treatment is very important. So I know this was a quick video, and I just kind of wanted to go over what these risk factors might look like, things that you might recognize, as well as some protective factors that might help you out if you're in that situation. So that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and be on the lookout for some of the future videos in this series. Thank you.